How's it going, guys? Today I'm going to do a quick little video on this article. Prolonged rest, long-term dynamic balance, and gait in a mouse ankle sprain model. I'm pretty impressed with myself because I was reading that backwards. So, somebody could very easily conclusion grab on this and start saying, ooh, we should be resting ankle sprains far more than we have been for the past maybe, depending on how you practice, 5 years, decade, or maybe just a couple 6 months, or you've been resting the snot out of people, put them in orthopedic boots. Because in the conclusion it reads, relative to 3 days of rest, prolonged rest, 1 and 2 weeks after a severe LAS, lateral ankle sprain, in mice positively affected balance. The apparent benefit of prolonged rest was noted on both dynamic balance, outcomes, and performance. Stride length was not altered by the duration of rest after surgically induced severe LAS in mice, and future research is needed. So, first of all, a friend of mine commented, said, why do they need to do these on a mouse or rat model? There's hundreds of lateral ankle sprains that walk into a PT chiro's office every week. It's a good question. And it's as usual when we're using mice or rat models, it's for control. But this is such a poorly designed study. And let's talk about why. So it was a surgical intervention to create the lateral ankle sprain. So they basically went in and transected the ATFL. The big problem here is there was no grade to the sprain, just lateral ankle sprain. So they're not telling us, hey, a grade 1, grade 2 responds better to rest versus grade 3, which I think most people would think we need to know that difference for outcomes, diagnostic procedures, everything. The other interesting thing here is when they say rest, the rest is still with movement. So they were just walking around their cage. What they were resting from was their awesome exercise wheel, or the really fancy mice had a Peloton bike. So the 3 levels of rest were 3 days, 1 week, and 2 week. And then at those interventions or those time frames, exercise wheel was placed back in. And then they looked at how often did they use the exercise wheel. And then they put them on basically like a Ninja Warrior rolling a log and had them run across the log and see how many times they slipped. So there's a lot of other problems with this besides the non-gradation of the LAS. The rest is with movement. So that may be the same as what we're doing in rehab. So instead of saying, hey, it's actually better to rest, we're saying early intervention, maybe not necessarily not loaded movement. We're not loading them dynamically. We're not putting them into the scenario where they could get the same injury, and we're not doing high impact things. That's still rest, but we're definitely moving, and we're doing 100% isometric loading and things like that, which that's not really talked about. And then the inability to recreate the injury. So it definitely talks about, I'm going to read a quote here. This is talking about lateral ankle sprains in general, statistics. So it says, duration of the residual symptoms was greater than 10 years. Symptoms, both acute and in those with CAI, chronic ankle instability, often include perceptual, worse self-reported function, mechanical, increased laxity, and sensory motor, so static and dynamic balance. So what are we saying here? That first one is what we're really going after in the rehab world, perceptual. Most people, right, especially in my office, with a lateral ankle sprain, did it while running. And typically I'm going to see somebody that ran on a trail. They didn't have their ATFL surgically transected. So what we're looking at here is if we put them back into the scenario where they can recreate the injury, run on a trail too soon, is that different than if we just have them do a different type of exercise at a higher or same intensity where they can't have the same injury, and then we see the same outcomes as this rest period? So what we really should be looking at here is it better to completely immobilize for 3 days, 1 week, 2 weeks versus say rest? Because I think this is a very semantic poor paper. So again, just wanted to point this out. When we're looking at research like this looks like, oh, this was good. But then you dive into the research, like on most research, you're like, it's just not quite the fact. So what do we still do with ankle sprains for the most part? We know that early intervention is the most important thing we can do. If we get them moving, in particular isometrics and unloaded concentric eccentric loading in the first 24 to 48 hours, we're going to have a higher success rate with better acute outcomes and better long-term outcomes up to 10 years post lateral ankle sprain, and also offsetting some of that possible CAI or chronic ankle instability. Hope that helps. I'll put a link up to the article. See ya.